obviously we see a lot of volatility in prices and we see cycles in our business, but essentially our role in the energy system and globally has been pretty consistent. Now that is far from true, and the pace at which that change is coming is accelerating dramatically. So whilst you move from a global perspective in a corporate into a country role and a company that is focused first and foremost on Oman, the issues are identical. The context is identical. The pathway in which we can achieve decarbonisation of hydrocarbon production and the pathway to industrial decarbonisation through the industry is the same thing. The portfolio looks different, but it's all the same issues. And we can afford to approach that, I think, in the same manner. There is, of course, the same kind of issues associated with how you partner and collaborate across the sector, outside the sector, in government, regulators, and also in international markets. So you're playing in the same pond, to be fair. It just has a different look and size and shape for your portfolio.
When you think of, obviously, the commitments that Oman has to make, like every country, commitments to the Paris Agreement previously, to the COP26 outcome, in a country with a major hydrocarbons portfolio, how can we, as an energy sector, support the commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement targets, etc., COP26, Glasgow now, and at the same token, if you like, sustain energy security?
Yeah, it's kind of the $64 million question, isn't it? But I think the first thing
we might be answering that one for the next 20 years, but nonetheless, you can start today.
Look, I think the first thing to note is that, of course, the NDCs, Oman's NDCs, are rooted in Oman's Vision 2040, okay, and the National Energy Strategy. So that is going to support that transition, albeit gradual, from where we are today to a low carbon economy, and also a mix that will be significantly lowering carbon emissions. So whether that's deployment of renewable energy or the deepening of energy efficiency, these are all carbon control pillars that we have within it. And the use of those, or the application implementation of those, will definitely enable the Sultanate to slow down its emission growth, which is where we are today, and then reduce it by the 7% or more by 2030 from business as usual. So it's clear that as a sector, we have a mandate around energy security and economic prosperity, but we also have to work to support those NDCs. And so in the first instance, that means we have to produce cleaner energy. So we have to adopt new technology, electrify our business, employ digital solutions to tackle our own emissions. Then as a sector, we obviously have to move into lower carbon fuels, such as hydrogen and ammonia and so forth, and other facilitators. In my world, I believe that includes CCS. We've got to develop and strengthen new supply chains by leveraging the existing infrastructure and supply chains we have in oil and gas, and then explore that cross-sector investment. It's clear to me that this is not a single sector discussion. 85% of emissions generated in the world come from the consumption of hydrocarbon or the consumption of energy systems, only 15% by its production. So if you're not working with the customer and you're not working cross-sector to tackle consumption, then you're not tackling the heart of the issue. And then, of course, we need platforms like this to exchange best practice. So in short, for me, it's about decarbonize our own emission base and help provide solutions to decarbonize industry. It was noticeable, actually, how much time was spent at COP26 on the principle and the concept of sectoral decarbonization. And I think we have a role as a sector. In fact, I'm a strong believer that we definitely have a role and a place in sectoral decarbonization. We can help produce and bring solutions by repurposing our infrastructure, our skills, our people, our way of working, our finance. And in PDO, we've actually defined a strategy that will do that, to tackle our own emission base and then move into sectoral decarbonization in support of Oman's NDCs. And in fact, I'd like to go beyond that and go further if we possibly can.
There's been a number of studies and I think case study evidence now that the net economic benefit of every dollar invested in building climate resilience. And however, the green shift, is not always a profitable posture. We had the challenge and the opportunity of Glass Point here in Oman. Great idea, never really quite made it in the scale up. how can we sort of, when we move to the synergy of water, food, energy nexus and the requirements that have for sustainable transformation, whilst ensuring ultimately the critical point of profitability?
Yeah.
All the easy questions.
I'm enjoying these easy questions this morning. Look, I think certainly there has clearly been some progress on this front, but it's undeniable how big a challenge this remains, right? So sustainable development, particularly around the nexus, it's not a new concept. It's at least a decade since we've been talking about it. And I think the problem statement still remains to a large degree. We see that here clearly in Oman. Just take scarcity in agricultural water, or issues in terms of accessing water and electricity in some cases. They're all very real. They're live. I think the good news is that if you look at a Vision 2040, energy, food, and water all appear as strategic sectors in Vision 2040. So it gives us a framework to work on it. I think, in essence, I'm very much in agreement with the comments from Dr. Rumchi. His Excellency is that at the moment, each of these sectors are largely working on their own agenda. And probably what we need here is an overarching agenda to help drive sustainable transformation, one that's competitive. And that last word, competitive, is the key one, because you're playing in international markets. So we have to be able to do something to not only sustainably transform each of these sectors through the nexus, but also remain competitive. And there probably are some fairly straightforward crossovers we need to be talking about. For example, emitted CO2 can be used sensibly in smart farming, and that is being done around the world, e.g., being used for intensive seaweed farming and so forth. Use of produced water from the energy sector rather than re-injection or disposal is being used now potentially to produce green hydrogen. So you're not consuming new water sources. Water usage in particular, I think, versus efficient allocation to food and energy is critical. The balance in that ecosystem is challenging.
But when you consider that desalination delivers 90% of potable water in Oman.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as an energy sector, PDO, we produce substantial amounts of water and have to manage that water and the energy consumed in managing that water. And so there are crossovers immediately to how can you use that in biosaline agriculture, for example, which is something we've been working on and researching in the interior and NIMA around the reed bed. So I think there are important crossovers for us to, if we have some umbrella and a way to govern that work. We need some frameworks, but unfortunately, we're also going to need quite considerable investment in the near term to make that a reality.
Well, there lies some of the challenge. Ultimately, the investment is critical. The fiscal health of Oman is getting better as the oil price recovers. S&P Global Ratings revised up Oman's credit outlook to positive last month from stable, which is in the right direction. But there lies the challenge: the ability to spend and invest in some of these big costs, while at the same token maintaining a credible credit posture, if you like, and not overreaching it. Maybe we'll take that question into the panel discussion with your colleagues. But before we invite Stephen Walter to the stage, let's take another survey question, which is looking at the bigger picture, if you like. Quite often, we've seen in the past, in times of oil price declines, big efforts and advancements in transition and in reform. And we saw during the COVID period of the price crash, certainly a big acceleration in the transition and the prominence of all the issues and opportunities of the transition. But going into COP26 in Glasgow, one might say that the transition started getting a bit of a bad rap, getting blamed for some of the sort of energy crisis we saw in Europe and even in China and in the UK, disruptions and so forth. So my question to the group this morning is, will the oil price recovery back above $80 this morning, will the oil price recovery derail or accelerate the energy transition in Oman? derail because the urgency perhaps is taken away, or accelerate because the financial muscle might be back in the toolbox to accelerate or derail the transition? What is the view of this room? Accelerate or derail the transition? Let me take the opportunity while we wait for the survey result to invite Steve Kelly, President and General Manager of Oxy Oman, to open his camera, and also Walter Simpson, Managing Director of CC Energy Development, to also open your camera and turn on your microphone, Steve and Walter. Okay. Great. Steve, before we get, I'd like to start with you in the next session, is get the answer to the survey so everybody can be put out of their sense of on this question. But survey result, Irene, do we have that? Yes, we do. Accelerate. A somewhat optimistic sense in the room today that on this occasion things will be different. Steve, your initial thoughts on that survey result? Are you optimistic that we will see that acceleration?
Good morning, Sean, and
good morning.
I guess I'm concerned and I wouldn't say worried, but I have a concern that it may do exactly what you described. Derail, maybe a bit of a strong word for it, but it certainly has the potential to take some of the urgency out of some of the discussions that we've had on the energy transition. What I'm hopeful for is that I think that a number of the stakeholders have made decisive turns in the direction that they're going. Speaking, for the energy sector, I know that energy companies that are involved in Oman have all made decisive turns over the period leading up to where we are today, both in terms of transition to renewable energy sources and in commitment to carbon management. So I think we've got, as a sector, we've got a huge role to play. We have to play a role in getting that message across, because not all of the areas of things that we are pushing for are generally accepted yet as being part of the solution base. And we need to get some progress on the ground and then demonstrate that what we're doing is driving the world in the right direction.
Let's welcome Walter Simpson. Walter, we've seen in the last decade alone gas consumption from 2008 to 2017 in Oman triple in its use, from about 400 million per cubic feet per day to 1.4 billion and counting. Ultimately, my question to you to kick us off in the Nexus is how can energy companies in Oman work more closely with food and water sectors to drive efficiencies across the Nexus? I mean, ultimately, the energy side of things does account for close to 90% of greenhouse gas emissions in Oman. So we clearly have a role to play. How can we cooperate, do you think, across the Nexus?
Well, good morning, Sean. Good morning, everybody. I think you're right. I mean, the industry has a key role to play. And we're right in the centre of change. And that's nothing new. That's been true since the oil industry started in the late 19th century. Always been right at the centre of upheaval and change and growth, the good and bad. So us being involved in that kind of change isn't anything new to the industry. What is different, I think, is that, as you say, it's that realisation of how the central energy and food and water are together, and how we can work as teams to make that happen. And I think our role in that is we've got a lot of experience in these areas and a lot to bring to the table. But I do sense we lack some trust. We're not generally trusted, and I think that was certainly true in terms of how COP sees the hydrocarbon industry. Didn't invite it even to COP. So I do.
Yet
think
now the next two are being hosted in major hydrocarbon producing countries. So clearly, the next 2 years, the conversation is going to evolve, and there's an opportunity there.
And I think that's very good, because I think it is central to an effective change. An effective transition cannot be effectively done, I don't think, without the involvement and the oil industry, the hydrocarbon industry, particularly driving things, because we're actually very good at it. We've done a lot of work in this area, a huge amount, and the industry that people comment on at COP and the activists complain about, it's not industry I recognise from working. This is an industry that has been responsible, does work on the stewardship of resources. So I think we bring a lot to the table. My challenge is, are we trusted that we're bringing something to the table that's valuable? And I think that's an area we've got to work at, is get that trust. And then I'm with Steve on that. How do you build that trust? It's about reducing our emissions, being transparent about the fact we're working hard to do it. It's about managing water sources effectively. And that may be reusing, or it may be making sure that saline water doesn't contaminate areas. It's about being responsible with those resources and showing we're doing that. And then I think it's working with the community. So actually helping all of the industries in our areas, building that trust with them and seeing as value. And then I think we can bring solutions that people can take on board and work with.
Steve, I was just coming back to the first question I asked you, and it sort of seems apt now, and the difference from an international actor, obviously operating all over the world, but in a sense, somewhat reactive at times, but trying to lead maybe in certain areas. But here in a country like Oman, the national energy company is seen as a leader regardless of what your business you're in. But my point is, which does the national energy sector, does the national energy have a responsibility to lead in this rather than the food sector or the water sector in Oman? How do you see that balance, if you like, as such a big national energy actor? I was with Aramco the other day, and they were talking about the role of Aramco and how they're called upon to do all sorts of things. They built the Saudi pavilion in the Dubai Expo and are responsible for staffing it for the first 6 months because Aramco gets things done. They know how to do things, etc. I mean, the same way PDO has that kind of posture in Oman. I'm wondering where you see the responsibility of leading in the Nexus and on your thoughts.
Yeah, interesting question. So do major oil companies like PDO or my colleagues on the panel have a role? Yes. Do we lead? Well, I think that depends. So if you're talking about the Nexus, we have definitely got a role to play in that. But PDO is in some regards a water company as well as an oil and gas company, right? So produce a large amount of water.
I think is it fair to say about 1 to 10 in terms of production?
Thereabouts, 9 or 10 barrels of water to every barrel of oil, indeed. So it's clear that we have a responsibility and accountability to manage that resource. We don't produce food, but the Nexus joins us together. So I spoke earlier about how we need the right framework, the right governance in place together with government and regulators to be able to do that. But do I need to stand up and be a leader and lead by example? Yes. Absolutely, and as Walter was just saying, I think we absolutely have a role in that. I mean, if I take water management as an example, we have already in place a clear policy and a strategy to reduce, reuse, and relocate. So if we're producing 9 to 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil, we need to do something responsible with that. So we reduce by trying to minimize the amount of water that we produce, which is an efficiency matter, because if it comes to surface, I have to process it, I have to consume energy to deal with it, I have to re-inject it or use it otherwise. And so there's an energy efficiency factor. I can reuse it because I can maximize oil recovery in the process by pressure support, but I can also relocate it and take it from areas where there's excess water to where there's a shortage. And we do that. We manage our water resources extremely carefully. In the north of Oman, we're reusing currently for salt making. In the south, we're putting it to use in agricultural purposes. We completed a research project in Nimmer at our reed bed location last year and tested salt tolerant species for agriculture, so for biosaline agriculture, which is something we're going to go ahead with. And I think, MEM, the ministry and the Research Council put together the Oman Water Hub just last year as well. So there you have water professionals which come from other sectors and other companies together with academia and government and the oil sector, putting together ways in which we can innovate and solve problems in water. So I think water is a very, very good example of where we cross over in the Nexus. And in a water short country, it's a particularly important matter for us to manage. So yes, I think we need to stand tall and manage not just the production and the responsible production of hydrocarbons, but also how we manage across sectors in the Nexus. I think that's really important for us to play a key role.
Steve, your thoughts on the same question, leading, I mean, so you're an international energy company operating in Oman with partners, et cetera, but the role of the energy sector, the opportunity of the energy sector to lead in this area and some of the obstacles to that nexus and that cooperation, do you think that need to be overcome?
Yeah, I think that the advantage that we have here is that we're, number one, we're respected. We've been fundamental to the development and growth of and prosperity in the country. So we generally have good standing in the community. So the trust,
you have that trust that Walter talked about.
Exactly, the trust issue. If you ask, if you poll the Oman population, the trust level for us, for PDO, for CCED, for Oxy, for Dalil, the trust levels are high. You have the same poll in the United Kingdom or Denmark or the United States. The trust levels are generally very, very low, and it's a historic factor. So I think that we can build on that, and it means that there are things that we can do here, to demonstrate progress. We can make inroads into driving towards lower carbon economy, to zero emissions power production over time, with trust on our side, because the resistance to the projects is not going to be as apparent. That might change over time as the younger population builds up. They're more connected with the rest of the world, and we have to be aware of that. And we have to make sure that we're not complacent about the trust levels that we have here.
Over 50% of the Omani population under the age of 25.
Indeed, very, and I don't know what, I think it's 30% of it is under 12. And, so there's a huge bow wave of young people coming through, and we do need to make sure that that we maintain that trust, because we have to have a long time horizon on this. This is not, we're not going to be boxed up and finished on this in the next 5 to 10 years. This is a 2040, 2050, 2060 time horizon. So that's something that we need to build on. But it does put us in a position that's, if you look at our energy, our portfolios around the world, this is an area of the world where we know that we have a head start in terms of buy-in from government and buy-in from the population. We already help and support the local population. We already help and support the food and the water sector. I mean, there are practical, hands-on examples of working hand in hand with whether it's date palm plantations or livestock farming, that are initiatives that have been set up with a view to food security, that are making use of relationships with concession holders in the country. We can set aside land within the concession area that doesn't interfere with the exploration and production of oil and gas, and make room for and provide basic utilities and support infrastructure, roads and so on. Yeah. For those sectors to make use of that. And then I, of course, echo Steve's comments about water. We've long described ourselves as a water business that produces oil. And Mukhaizna, as an example, is no different in sort of volumes. Everything starts with deep, heavily saline aquifer water, which doesn't get anywhere near the normal water supply chain. All of our steam generation is built on that base as makeup water, and then and then the reuse of produced water for steam generation. And that's, steam generation requires pretty purified water to be able to do it, and we don't go anywhere near any aquifers that are that could be used for irrigation or for human consumption. So, I think that leadership is something that we can play our part in. Whether we're right in the center of it is a different question, but I think we certainly need to be able to build on the trust levels we have.
Walter, before we come to you on this, I'd like to go to the survey question to start to bring in some of the solutions. I mean, energy efficiency is as important, and that's certainly the question of the survey. Is energy efficiency is as important as alternative energy sources in Oman? Agree or disagree? The idea that we need to go and build the world's biggest solar farms and wind farms, etc. Yes, perhaps, but energy efficiency, Walter, is a pretty critical one. I'm wondering your thoughts on the technologies there that are now available to really deploy, and what were, within the context of this COVID period, were there lessons learned that can be continued?
Absolutely. Look, I think one of the biggest tools available to us that's new and that I don't think is really been explored to its full potential yet is digitization and using that data to get the efficiency. And I believe that one of the real benefits of COVID was that workforces got used to using digital solutions to be able to work. Now, not necessarily the fancy digital solutions I'm talking about here in AI to improve efficiency, but the entire workforce became comfortable with this kind of conference, doing it virtually, doing it from home and working in a different way. And I think the benefit of that will play on to a better take up on these kind of digital solutions. So I do think there are opportunities for us, and I'm absolutely in the space where, the first thing you need to do is be as efficient as possible in your energy use before you start looking for alternatives. Because even when you move to the alternative, if you're not efficient in your energy use, you're going to waste the alternative. So we've really got to drive that as a solution to this.
Similar, Steve, on that energy efficiency, leveraging innovative technologies to reduce wastewater and so forth. What would you identify as some of those opportunities? Steve Fivemister.
Steve P. Do you want to take it, Steve K? Yeah, look, it's so I can tell you a little bit about how we've approached it, because I think I read somewhere, I think it was in the IEA, who suggested that by leveraging existing technologies, and particularly Walter was talking about digital technologies, and we all know the range of technologies available to us through AI and predictives and Internet of Things, and if fully implemented, I think it was IEA who said you can achieve something like 30 to 60% emission reduction without having to enter into the multi-billion type dollar investments that are being touted. Now, that doesn't mean to say we're not going to have to do those, because we are. And there are multiple independent reports that demonstrate that we need to be investing in alternative fuels and low carbon fuels, offsets such as CCS and so forth. But certainly at a local scale, what we have been doing for a number of years now is applying a methodology that has a value-based approach. And so we have, over the last 5 or so years, we've employed 32 new technologies across what we call our 10 corporate challenges. So they include core hydrocarbon production issues, but critically, energy efficiency is one of the 10. And water management is another one. And so
you have, on that point, sorry, Steve, to interrupt you, I just wanted to get you to focus a little bit into the influence. We talked about leadership before in terms of the sector, but inevitably a big opportunity to influence the supply chain. I mean, you have a massive supply chain in Oman and the ability to drive efficiencies there. If you might just touch on that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it was interesting because we had this. I just came from running the upstream business for Shell in the UK, and this is a major point of discussion there. If you look at anything in Northwestern European policy on energy transition, you'll see the supply chain actually at the centre. As operators, we like to think we're right at the centre of it because that's how we're trained to be. But actually, it's the supply chain that holds a lot of the capability and the competence and the technology. I think when it comes to technology, by the way, I see more and more oil companies and operators not resorting to proprietary solutions. The solutions are already in the supply chain. The question is, how do you collaborate and innovate with those companies to implement those technologies in your business? So I think, you know, with over 60 years or so, we've been developing the supply chain in Oman and local companies. And that creates jobs, local manufacturing, services, development of small and medium enterprises. If you look at the local SLCCs, the super local community companies, a number of digital accelerators that have been put in place, R&D, innovation, new engineering companies, construction companies, we have developed in Oman that supply chain. So we now have to repurpose that in some sense, as we repurpose ourselves to the energy transition, our skills, and also repurpose our infrastructure. The supply chain is going to be super critical in that for a sustainable transition. And I think, you know, there are multiple opportunities already being, if you look around in the supply chain, you already see people taking that on, for example, in agriculture and pumps and reverse osmosis and so forth. You can see the innovation already there, 3D printing, it's already in our sector. So we have to leverage that. We have to, because then once you combine that with what Walter was talking about in terms of our digital solutions and applications of AI and automation, then you can get a safer, more efficient, reliable oil business, but also one that's doing that sustainably by leveraging the capability within our supply chain.
I just want to finish up talking a little bit about, I started my opening comments, Steve Kelly, about the idea of part of the transition, part of the Nexus also is energy companies transforming, oil companies transforming, the whole idea, branding even, right? The Qatar Petroleum, Qatar Energy, the Equinor, from Statoil to Equinor, and so forth. Oxy, even sort of in its recent branding, moving away from its past identity, but ultimately also the business. You talked there about being a water company. I think you said water management that produced oil. You might now be going forward to say, well, actually, you're a carbon management company that produces water and oil. Talk a little bit about the carbon opportunity, the carbon management. There is now this new Oxy Low Carbon Ventures using human-made CO2 emissions in new ways.
It's a really exciting direction. I think the way we characterize this is that we've got, you know, we have what's right in front of us at the moment. We've got a transition period ahead of us. Our ambition and our ultimate objective is that we will be regarded as a carbon management company. So we're building that. We're building on the base of long, many years, many decades of CO2 management, a major injector of CO2 into underground reservoirs, building on those skills and aligning ourselves in relationships with other technology providers in the field of both in, you know, direct air capture, in zero emissions, hydrocarbon powered power generation with our Net Power project, and then also reusing the CO2 with the CO2 that's captured, whether it's from direct air capture or from point source capture. Then we can use that immediately in EOR projects in Oman is a great location to be able to do that. But also being able to permanently store in saline aquifers, where you get better certification and you can access the carbon credit market, and then also repurposing the CO2 that you capture into low carbon fuels and other products. The technology that around this is in some cases is in infancy, and in other cases is being demonstrated today. So we've got zero emissions power generation synchronizing to the grid. In Texas, we've got a demonstration project being built on the direct air capture. So we're
Net
very
zero concrete production.
We've got a number of projects that are that are on the ground now, and we're really excited about that. I think that just to go back to the point about the supply chains, is I think that what's going to be really critical going forward is that the relationship between ourselves and the vendors in the supply chain, logistics people in the supply chain, is that we've got to look forward to a future where we're working in partnership, and we're looking for people who get the big picture here, that don't just want to sell a product. They want to be part of that integrated supply chain that drives towards the sort of efficiencies that we're talking about.
Walter, your closing comments on that equation. You mentioned it earlier. We are energy efficiency is important. I'll turn 90% agree. No surprise there, perhaps. Walter, the idea that you can utilize existing skills to do new things, that as an outcome, as a future in terms of the Nexus, but also in terms of a more lower carbon energy company?
Look, undoubtedly, as an industry, we've been very creative and we've solved some very, very difficult problems over the years.
But surprisingly, not carbon. I mean, carbon capture. I mean, Steve Feimster mentioned that we've been at this for 10 years. Carbon capture sequestration still seems to be an over-the-hill challenge.
And undoubtedly it is. But the investment of money, the desire to do it, the outside pressure, all of those help to drive those solutions. And I think it's an integral part of the industry surviving, and particularly when I see this place for the smaller independents, what do I think is important to us? We've got to be the low-cost producer. So that means really focusing on supply chain and working with your partners to make sure that everything is driven as efficiently as possible. You've got to have low emissions, and that comes with the easy, let's stop flaring, but to the more complicated, even where we are burning fossil fuels, how do we capture the carbon and store it? And then managing our water effectively and our waste. And as I mentioned earlier, being a valued member of the community. It doesn't matter how good you are at all of the first ones. If the community doesn't want you, you're out. So I think those all fit together as being vital for us as an industry to be a part of the future of Oman and future of many countries where I think we're an integral bit of the transition.
Steve Feimster, your closing comments?
Sure. There was a couple of quick things I just wanted to touch upon, and if I may, to close. I think the first thing I observe, and it's less prevalent in Oman and the GCC, but other parts of the world, it's dominant. The first thing is I feel the debate is polarized. And I think that society generally is pushing to trying to switch off the current energy system before we've actually designed and built the new one. I mean, the key word here is transition. And so what I heard at ADIPEC is a very clear sense of how we need to use COP27 in Egypt and COP28 in Abu Dhabi in UAE to shine a light on this issue. So as players in the energy system, we're not complacent or arrogant, but if one turns off one energy system before you've designed and built another, you're into a supply crunch and you're into energy deficiency, particularly in developing or less developed countries. And we need to be cautious of that. I think today people are already talking about supply crunch because investment in hydrocarbons has turned down dramatically in the last couple of years. So we need to be conscious of that factor and how we are going to continue to sustainably invest in hydrocarbons in the transition. We're committed to the transition, but it is a transition. And I think secondly, picking up on something Walter said on trust, is that as an industry globally, I don't think we've got our narrative right yet, because we see ourselves as part of the solution, but I don't think most of the stakeholders, particularly the court of public opinion, agrees with us. And we have a lot of work to do to demonstrate and build that trust, to have the right to be a part of the solution. And I think, I do think that COP coming to the region, North Africa and the Middle East, will make a big difference in that. And I think
it will, but it will also put a spotlight on the inconsistencies, as it did similarly in Glasgow, as it did to Qatar when they were hosting the World Cup, or their
Indeed.
prep. It will come with a spotlight of opportunity, but also of challenge.
Indeed, but I think we're up for that, right? And so I don't think you can work your way through this without being part of the dialogue.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's anything that comes out of the next 2 years, one would think a great success to be seen as part of the solution and not part of the problem. That would be a great outcome of the next 2 years. I must wrap it up there. Really appreciate it. Steve Feimister, the new Managing Director of Petroleum Development Oman. Thank you so much. Steve Kelly, President General Manager of Oxy Oman, and Walter Simpson, Managing Director of CCED. Thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciate it. Very useful insights. And I'd invite you to step off the virtual stage and switch off your mics and cameras. Thank you. Before we bring on the next panel, I would like to bring up another survey question on the point of carbon management. Just how big an opportunity is this? Oxy, as Steve Kelly was articulating, they are changing to extent their whole future outlook around the opportunity of carbon management. The idea that one could go around the world, instead of taking oil out of the ground, you could take CO2 out of the air and capture it and put it into holes in the ground that have now been emptied from years of oil and gas production. Big opportunity in direct air capture, as it's called, DAC. So carbon management estimated to be a $2 trillion business by 2050. That's only a few years away. It's as long as I've been working in the Middle East nearly. So carbon management is a gigantic business opportunity. It's a big word, gigantic. How everybody's gigantic is another person's different definition, but nonetheless, a big business opportunity. Agree or disagree with this statement? Agree or disagree with this statement? And it gives me the opportunity to, while people are voting, to invite our next panel onto the virtual stage. We had the voices of 3 experienced oil and gas industry executives there, and now we have the opportunity to hear from a more diverse, if you like, voice across the Nexus that will give us the views very much from the ground in Oman. Let's welcome Engineer Salah El Shanfari, Group CEO of Oman Food Investment Holding Company, to open his camera and his microphone. Abdul Rahman Al Yahi, CEO of Oman Society for Petroleum Services, obviously a society representing the broad sweep of the oil and gas industry and its supply chain. Engineer Zahar Suleimani, President of Oman Water Society. I invite the 3 of you to open your cameras and we can kick off by getting the survey result of the survey question we just had. How big an opportunity is carbon management? Overwhelming view in this room, big opportunity in a country like Oman in particular, given the amount of reservoir or spaces in which one could actually store CO2, direct air capture. Let's start off this morning giving each of our speakers the opportunity to sort of make an opening comment on the question of the forum: how to find sustainable and holistic solutions for Oman to achieve water, food, energy security. Let's kick off with Engineer Salah, please.
Good morning, Sean. Thank you.
Good morning.
Everybody, thank you. Been very interesting discussion in the morning. We think we should go through the process by design and redesign. Designing our food energy system through a circular design, what we call a circular design, and then redesign what we're doing. And our conventional business has been there for 60 years, doing so many things without looking at the design itself. Currently, most of the food is produced through linear methods. It's called the linear production system, which does not, look into circularity as a major drive. In our part of the world, in our sector, the food system that we're currently doing in Oman, we are trying to make sure that we are a responsible investor that is caring for the society and caring for the environment and making sure that the food that we produce is produced with less. So trying to produce more with less, which takes us to the design issue. I'll give you an example for what we're doing now. For example, in the dairy business here in Oman, where we have a major dairy production, Mazoon Dairy, which is a driver in the dairy sector at this part of the world, we have designed our production system to look into major circularity, components of the whole production system. Since we are, for example, producing a lot of slurry, then that slurry have to be converted into biogas. Biogas have to be converted into energy, and so on. So circularity at its best can be demonstrated at our own Omani agriculture context. And in fact, because of the mandate that we have in the group, we believe we can demonstrate to the world and demonstrate to the Omani people and government that it can be done. For example, this biogas bioreactor is the first of its kind in the dairy sector here, this part of the world, and it is the first biogas plant in Oman. So we can do things and show the world and show the Omani people the possibilities that we can do and how we can capture, energy from biofuels and from the likes of biogas and converting harmful gases into beneficial, nutrients as well as energy, and of course capturing and reusing water at its best. This is exactly what we are doing today. But I want to comment a little bit on the carbon issue, because today people don't know that we can convert carbon into food. And this is a major drive if we work with a carbon company that, Sean, you say you want to redesign the oil companies to become carbon companies. I think that will make them more closer to food, because today you can capture carbon, store it, and inject it into greenhouses to speed up the production and to speed up the growth of fruits and vegetables inside the greenhouse. And that's how we can today transform the industry and work in the Nexus together. Thank you. I cannot hear you, Sean. Sean, you're off.
Muted. I muted myself. Engineer Al Suleimani, we welcome your opening comments, please, from the water perspective.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me in this interesting meeting. I think in the water sector, and as Engineer Saleh mentioned, we are in a desertic area. Water is shortage, and it is a well-known phenomena. So we cannot manipulate and say we have water and we are abundant of water and we have to increase our land of agriculture and with the traditional way. I think we have to re-engineer, or we have to use a new method of agriculture, either farming system or other products like Engineer Saleh mentioned. So the water is depleting. We have shortage of water, which is the groundwater. Thankful for desalination. We are having about 90% of our domestic water from desalination. But for agriculture, traditionally, we are using the fly system, which is also affected by the civilization and the urban expansion. And also we have many things is affecting the water system in the area. Climate change is one of them. So I think we count more on the agriculture sector. They use the new technology and modern agriculture system, so we can best use of each drop we have to produce food. So this combination of water and food mixing is very important. And if we use the groundwater, also will need energy. Pumping the water from deep, it is every year is going down, so we need more energy to pump the water, and using the fuel, traditional or energy from the grid, which is producing or costing us more gas and costing a lot of money to abstract this water. And this is affecting the not only the water situation, which depleting, but also the cost of the product of agriculture, and then we cannot compete. We have to import cheaper product. So all this together is affecting, and we have to find solution, and we have to work on this nexus as a one, water, energy, and food. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening thoughts. Abdul Rahman, the interview with the oil industry, energy industry leaders, little bit of reluctance to take on the mantle of leadership in this Nexus push. Obviously acknowledging their role clearly, but leadership, perhaps Opal and as the representative of the whole sector has that possibility. Your opening comments, please.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Indeed, Sean, the Nexus plays a crucial role in the Middle East and specifically in Oman. I think the Nexus approach specifically to water and energy planning can lead to a smarter, more resilient development solutions. And I think in Oman, we have really a strong foundation, and organization like Opal can bring, all key players together. Today in Opal, we have more than 452 member companies registered with us from oil and gas. And most recently, we got also new members from power and electricity joining the association. And I think, and as always, oil and gas companies have been critical in every decisions made by the government, specifically on the energy transition. We are in Oman, we have one family. So we can easily bring everybody and all stakeholders together. The only thing we really need to speed up taking the decision, and also we need clear policies in order for us to move things faster. However, we have really a strong position, Sean, on bringing everybody together. And as you can see today, we have people and decision makers from all sectors coming so easily together to get things done. And Opal can play a crucial role on leading and bringing all the stakeholders together, as we did in many occasions, especially during the crisis. During COVID-19. We absolutely, I think the energy sector can lead, together with agriculture and also with power generation and water desalination companies, the transition and building this nexus.
And are those companies, Abdul Rahman, are they members of, how wide does the membership of Opal go in terms of power generation, water management?
We have members from all sectors, although we are mostly focusing on energy and minerals. But again, we have members from from power, from electricity, and also even agriculture. Companies are members with us. To be surprised with, yeah.
Engineer Salah, food security will really depend on Oman's ability to finance imports. When 70% or so of the food is imported, and we've seen some fairly scary supply disruptions in the world this year in terms of bottlenecks and such things. But ultimately, how do we have oil, according to studies, 15, maybe 20 years left of oil supply in Oman, and the critical revenue that brings, gas a little bit longer. But ultimately, the financing food security based on imports does seem to have a weak outlook when the revenue from hydrocarbons starts to decline. How do you close that circle, do you think? As we said earlier, the credit rating of the Oman has been under a little bit of duress during different oil price cycles.
Yes, Sean. Thank you. Very, very important question. In fact, few things to remember that Oman have secured the second rank in terms of food security in the Arab world, and number 32 globally. So food supply were not disturbed during the COVID-19, and there were no panic buying during the pandemic. We have not seen any shortages in the shelves. So that's one thing to look into, and to see how resilient our food reserve system that allows everybody to have access to food. So the food security is quite intact. In the same time, the design of the food security program that brings investors and buyers and financiers together to finance commercially viable projects. What we're looking at is import substitution at its best. So currently, the projects that we're developing are projects that are financially sustainable, and that can substitute the imports. In the dairy sector, for example, we're getting close. In 2025, hopefully, we'll be fully self-sufficient. So be zero imports of fresh dairy products. I mean milk and fish. We are today one of the largest fish producers in the world. Our consumption is around 150,000 tons. We produce 500,000 tons, and we're heading toward the 1 million ton after 5 years. So if you take examples one by one and dissect the food sector, you would find there will be shortages that we have in rice, for example, in wheat and some pulses, and so on. So we need to really plan very well by investing and reinvesting and looking at opportunities beyond the region and beyond the Omani borders by working very closely with the likes of Australian producers or Argentinian producers to secure some of the needs of the country, as well as some of the needs of the region. But speaking at specific projects and products, for example, Steve Kelly have mentioned the working together in the livestock production in concession areas. That's a great example of where we produce a lot of poultry that could possibly cover the need of the country in areas like the one mentioned by Steve. At the same time, we are working very closely to make sure that contract farming at its best, working with the Farmers Association across the world to secure some of our needs. So it's all sustainable in terms of financially sustainable, because it doesn't depend at all in any kind of subsidy. Therefore, the project that we do are commercially viable, whether you do it in Oman, outside Oman, and they do not receive any kind of subsidy. Therefore, the essence of subsidy coming from the abundance of oil does not reflect the way we do business today. In the food sector, we have moved away totally from government subsidy to make sure the projects that we develop are self-sustainable and they are financially sustainable to any banker. So all bankable projects that will make Oman a food hub for the region.
Engineer Suleimani, it's clear that Oman needs to diversify its water supply in order to secure long-term water security. 90% currently from desalination, which is a very energy-intensive process, at least at current technology, very carbon-intensive. And yet we have just the previous speakers talking this morning about producing, they're calling themselves water management companies, 10 barrels of water per barrel of oil. What can we do in Oman to make better use of produced water, reusable water? What do we need to do to create a greater nexus between your universe and the water that is being produced in the energy space? Unmute, sorry, engineer.
Thank you. This is a very good question. And Oman Water Society has organized two conferences, one domestic in Duqm area and one international in Muscat with our partner, the Produced Water Society. And we have submitted in Oman Water Society to the Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Agriculture and the Research Council and to BDO to establish a chair or a sort of a program in the Research Council is to deal only with produced water. We need a lot of research to purify and to treat this water. And now there is a lot of support, and there is a program in the Research Council to treat this water. And BDO has a huge program doing research to try to make use of this water. It's also costing them a lot of money and energy to get rid of it. So the best way is to spend this money in research and reusing this water. It is true in far place in the desert, but we can have a program of greening the desert by some product which will help the country in solving some of this shortage, especially for agriculture.
How much of an obstacle, engineer Salismani, is it culturally versus scientifically? The idea that to deploy and use this, make better use of such a large volume of produced water. Much of it is certainly clean sufficiently for agricultural use, if not more.
And it is scientifically, I think still the technology is very expensive to treat this water because the heavy metals, even after the initial treatment, which is done now by the red bed system, still there is some heavy metals. We cannot put it in the food chain or but BDO has tried a lot of product like wood or cotton or this thing which will reduce, if it is already implemented, will reduce the import of this material. So this will help. Also using this for now the red bed, it is reducing the carbon emission. It is a good, but scientifically, I think we are in Oman Water Society, we are working with the university, the nanotechnology, it is very important. And there is a big research with the stakeholder to reach a point that we can use this water freely from any concern of health concern, which is the most important thing. There's the heavy metals, which it costs a lot of money to remove it by the traditional way. So we are thinking and working with other stakeholders how to minimize this risk and to remove all this poisoning material from the produced water.
Abdul Rahman, what are your thoughts on, you mentioned earlier about efficiency of decision making. It seems the Nexus is a critical either victim of that or the absence of that. Where do you think we are in terms of the policies we need, the government structures? Do they need to be adjusted in order to allow some greater alignment between these three critical components? Your thoughts on policy being in the fit for purpose, so to speak.
Sure. Well, I think we, as I said earlier, I think we have really a strong position We have, for example, Oman Investment Authority, where most of the agriculture and fisheries products are overseen by Oman Investment Authority. And when it comes to the oil and gas, we have Ministry of Energy and Minerals, which also oversees the power generation and desalination plants as a highest authority or regulatory body for that. So we have really a limited number of players who can work together and develop a joint policies and strategies, to connect the full value chain of the.
Is it sufficiently? Let me just interrupt. Sorry to cut in there, but Abdurrahman, I just want to get to the crux of it. Is it sufficiently empowered the entities that have some element of authority around this? Or is it of a significant priority? We're talking, 14, 15 years of oil revenues left. We're in the last stop saloon here, so to speak, to really push this forward. Is it urgent enough at a policy level, do you think?
I think it's very, very urgent, very critical to bring everybody, under one roof and start really building the strategies. I think it's very important that we work together as a policy or regulatory bodies in the countries looking after the three pillars: the water, food, and energy. Indeed, it's important, Sean. As I said earlier, I think we have very strong positions to work together, and we have been working together, by the way. I have seen, for example, BDO supporting, the 1 million date palm, project, supplying them with electricity and supplying them with water, for example. So there is already mutual aid and agreements between different sectors supporting each other. However, again, the energy efficiency is very important. Making the right decision at the right time and place, I think it's very important. We have enough, for example, installed electricity capacity in the country. It's 40% higher than our consumptions in the country. Also, the oil and gas companies produce electricity to the grid as well. So we really need more engagements, more collaboration and engagements between different stakeholders to make the right decisions and put the right strategies for future when it comes to energy efficiency and as well as energy transition. The collaboration is there, Sean, and I think increasing day after another. And I think this forum will play also and will, pave the path towards developing strategies, coming up with a number of recommendations for the regulatory bodies in the country.
Let's just go to a survey question, see what the room thinks about that idea. Should Oman establish a Ministry of Water, Food, Energy Nexus? We've seen in recent times new ministries of climate change. We've seen new ministry, even in the UAE, we have a Ministry of Happiness. Perhaps it's time for a Ministry of Water, Food, Energy Nexus that can really bring all of these elements together. I welcome your views on that. If indeed it is the sort of it needs it. Maybe in a perfect world we could do without it, but in the urgency of it we're facing, that perhaps we need an entity that actually does bring these pieces together. Engineer Al-Shafari, we talked in the earlier session the idea of public trust and the idea of public perception being against, in terms of that case, it was the oil and gas not being seen as part of the solution. I'm wondering how important, how you would regard the public voice in this, the public awareness to food security and water security in a country that is severely water stressed and severely food stressed. And so efficiency over consumption is a critical part of this solution. Your thoughts on what needs to be done for public engagement?
Thank you. Well, look, we look at inclusiveness as a way and a major driver of where we go. So most of our projects are in rural areas where you have very fragile communities and communities that needs a lot of attention. We do a lot of things to make sure that they're included in what we do. Majorly, we provide employment. That's a major driver. Training, as well as ICV, community health, working together to alleviate these communities and making sure they're also partners. They're fully engaged in what we do by disseminating part of the benefits financially as well as technically and environmentally to them. So in cases where we have access of things, we provide that access to the communities around us. At the same time, we make sure we are a friendly corporate sort of partner that works together with these communities. And that's the only way. In my own capacity, I have been in the sector for more than 33 years. And this is what we have designed most of the project, that we work closely with the communities, with the partners, and they are the ultimate sort of customer at the end of the day. They have to consume our products. At the same time, they have to have that loyalty as well as trust in what we do. And luckily and successfully, we have demonstrated to the rest of the country that this is a good example of working collaboratively with all stakeholders, including the local communities, through various programs. Yes, it is working, Sean.
Engineer Suleimani, your thoughts on the same question, the public awareness, and also welcome your thoughts on the aligning supply chains to energy, food, and water. But first, are we a sufficient public awareness about efficiency of consumption and ultimately the massive challenge to continuing to produce this amount of desalinated water into the future might be challenged? Sorry, you're on mute again, Mr. Engineer.
Yeah, this is very important. I think the public awareness, we should work hard on this issue. I think maybe we need to publish figures about the cost not only in terms of reals, but to the environment, the footprint of this energy and the gas which we are burning to produce the desalinated water. It is very expensive to the environment and to our budget. So this figure are not published always. We know how much we pay for our bill for domestic water, which is subsidized. And I think Oman Water Society has a role on this, and we are bringing all the stakeholders together in many workshops and conferences to try to disseminate this information and to tell them that this is desalinating water is very expensive, and we have to rationalize the use of this water. On the other hand, in the agriculture system, since the groundwater is almost fixed,
gone,
we can and scarce, and it is fixed. We don't expect that there is more groundwater. If we go to the fossil, we are already using the fossil water, and it is going down and down, and more energy to abstract it. The flash flood, we are seeing the cyclones, and this is coming and going quickly.
Yeah.
It's a flood, the typical thing. It will come within 24 hours and wash everything and go. So
it would be good if it could be captured.
Yeah, if we can capture it all, but
because it's coming again, I'm sure that there's going to be.
So I think what we need also in the agriculture sector is they think about using the renewable energy to produce water. The groundwater, there is saline water also coming, and renewable energy, because maybe it will reduce the carbon footprint and the emission and this thing. But it's come all with a package of awareness to all the sector, all the stakeholders. They should complete each other to reach a solution to reduce the impact of the water shortage.
Well, that sounds like a very good as a recommendation. I was just going to ask all speakers to make a recommendation, something specific, and that certainly sounds like your one. Let's get this survey question result, and then let Abdul Rahman give us what he might see. Should Oman establish a Ministry of Water, Food, Energy Nexus? Yes, 59%, no, 41%. So a fair, serious majority there. Abdul Rahman, if you had a wishing, a magic wand, what would be your top recommendation to align the nexus of food, energy, water in Oman?
Well, although I vote for no, but the answer came yes.
So we know that won't be your recommendation. What will be yours? What's your ultra?
I think, Sean, I think there are a number of recommendations that.
But give us your top one.
Okay, the top one, I think the water cut, the water oil ratio is very high in Oman. And I think in investing on the R&D on trying to find technology to clean the water produced from oil wells is really important, and I think will help Oman overcome any shortages on water. Of course, beside also building dams, because Oman recently, with the climate change, we start getting more cyclone, more water. I think that is also something the government has to look at very, closely. So looking and spending more on R&Ds for cleaning the water produced from oil wells or oil fields is very critical, Sean.
Thank you. I think that might also be an opportunity for a collaboration project with other countries in the region. Clearly, everybody has that produced water. It's part of the carbonate architecture of the reservoirs in the region. Common challenge. Engineer Salah, your closing comment, your top wish or recommendation for Nexus.
More greener sort of technologies and more renewable energy-based food production, and more utilization of saline water, since we have plenty of it, to produce food, and that could be a way out for us.
That's very interesting. Well, listen, we need to wrap it up there. We've one more session in the plenary, very interesting, two speakers around a few survey questions. But Engineer Salah Al-Shanfari, thank you so much for your insights and participation. Engineer Zahar Al-Suleimani, the same with you. Great to get the perspective of the water. And Abdul Rahman Al-Yahya doing amazing work at OPAL. Keep it up. It's great to see that organization step forward as being a real sort of a coherent unifier of the diverse and expansive energy sector. Could really have a big role to play going forward. Thank you, Abdul Rahman. And we invite all of you to turn your camera off and also your microphone, and we will invite the final two speakers of this session to open theirs as we move to the last session, which will be tackling a few survey questions. Let's welcome Michael Doan, who is Global Managing Director, Food and Water at the Nature Conservancy, and has stayed up very late or woke up very early. I'm not quite sure what it is in the context of Middle America. Probably stayed up very late. That would be the proper one if I do my quick math. And also Salim El-Sakati, who is the Oil South Director at PDO. Welcome to you both. Great to have you. Let's get the first survey question in. And what impact will hosting COP27 in Cairo and COP28 in the Middle East have on accelerating the development of low carbon economy in the region? That's the question. And looking for your answers is a big moment. We talked about it in the earlier session, the earlier conversation, for the energy sector to become part of the solution, not part of the problem. This is a big window of opportunity. So what impact COP27 in Cairo, COP28 in the UAE, in the Middle East have on accelerating the development of a low carbon economy in the region? Welcome your thoughts on that. We can, hosts and panelists cannot vote, really. Why is that? That's the first time I haven't been able to vote. Okay, not being allowed to vote. Hope everybody else is being allowed to vote. Michael, Joanne, I wanted to get your opening thoughts on everything you've heard. I don't know how long you've been on with us, but from a perspective of Middle America, a lot of these challenges you guys are facing as well, obviously very different circumstances. But what you've heard today, your opening thoughts on this Nexus challenge facing Oman.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean, and good morning to all of our guests here today. It's really nice to be with you. And yes, it's a fascinating discussion and one that I think describes the urgency that is felt not only in Oman, but indeed around the world. These issues are not totally unique to Oman. And I think there's also hope in the solutions. I did particularly enjoy the last panel and some of the themes that were coming up on circularity, on a regenerative food economy, on restoring the natural hydrograph of watersheds through better land management and restoration. Some of these same practices transmit over to fisheries and what we know about restoring habitat to improve wild catch fisheries, but also to improve aquaculture. And, there's just a tremendous opportunity when we start to think about what I would describe as the restoration economy that comes through natural systems and can augment and be enjoyed while we make this transition that's being discussed on energy futures. And so I think there's a lot of overlap around the world with some of these challenges, but also I guess the thing that I would just start off by saying is I come to this conversation with great hope. We understand there's great challenge, but we also have hope because the knowledge that I'm seeing accumulating around how resilient and kind of regenerative these systems can be gives us a way out. It gives us a way forward.
And worth noting also, Michael, amongst his many hats, is a farmer himself. And runs with his family cattle and row crop farming operation in Kansas. Salim, how reassuring is that ultimately that Oman's challenges, the Middle East challenges, are not ones to be faced alone, and that we can find solutions in other places that can be brought in, and we can cooperate and being case studies like hydrogen, for example. Now, green hydrogen is a potential example of a international collaboration for solution.
Thank you, Sean. Really very interesting topic and question. But really, if you look back on history, I mean, oil and gas industry, I mean, which we are really part of it in this region, constitute big part of basically the GDP and income of this region, has faced many challenges in the past. And really have built, really, I would say, very big stamina in terms of dealing with those challenges. And this is really another challenge, which is really the energy transition that we're facing. So the way I see it is really...
Sorry, Salim, on that challenge, it says another challenge, or is this the challenge? I mean, is this an existential challenge, not just another, oh, the oil price fell 30%?
No, it's a completely different challenge. But what I'm saying is we have the ingredients, we have the know-how to deal with that. So it's really, the way I see it, is a great opportunity, actually, as Steve, I think, mentioned in his speech, is really for the region to shine as well on this and show what they can offer. So I see it as an opportunity really to really drive the agenda, indeed to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, and really to demonstrate that as well, which is very important moving forward. So great opportunity.
Let's get the survey result and see how optimistic the momentum of the COPs coming to the region are to accelerate the development of the low carbon economy. Moderate to significant, we'll take that, 60 plus 29. So that's relatively optimistic. It would be nice if people were feeling it was more than moderate. But Michael, your thoughts? I mean, COPs are engines of this great change. They're trying to obviously propel us all forward in our own individual and collective way. But from your perspective, can these be triggers? I mean, the green economy is emerging on its own.
Well, there's certainly agenda building events. We know that. And I guess from my perspective and our perspective at the Nature Conservancy, you know, when really there was momentum that was built in Paris for, you know, commitments and nationally determined commitments, you know, some that are more successful than others at this point, but nevertheless, commitments to move through pathways to change, to secure a certain future by mid-century. What we found at that time was most of those commitments basically completely neglected the role of nature as part of the solution pathways. That inspired us to do some science that has now been published and I think now referenced widely that suggests that up to 30% of the near-term emission reductions needed by 2030 to be on that 2050 glide path to 1.5 degree to a 1.5 degree future can come most cost effectively through nature-based solutions. Solutions that improve the management of and provisioning of forests, in agriculture, in coastal wetlands. They're highly cost effective, but the issue is there's not near enough attention to these solutions, and there's certainly not enough investment. And I think this gets us back to this transition question. How do we finance the transition? And, you know, photosynthesis is a wonderful thing. It's a technology we already have in hand. We know how it works. The issue is we're just not investing in it to the degree that it can be a more valid solution pathway and give us a cleaner glide path. So that's certainly our ambition, is to raise the role of nature. We think it can be 30% of the solution, but it's only about 1 to 2% of the conversation. We aim to change that in Cairo, and we think there's a good chance it will be higher on the agenda.
Well, certainly in Oman, the nature is a lot of 1,500 mile coastline, wind and wave power must be there. Salim, your thoughts on the COP question, and maybe we'll get the answer. Have we got an answer on that? Minimal, we did have moderate and significant. But your thoughts, Salim, on the response and the opportunity of the green economy in Oman?
Well, it's not surprising because, of course, of the view in oil industry in general. But I think it's as I said, it's an opportunity really to showcase what we can do as an industry, and also to demonstrate as well what we have done so far and the seriousness that we are putting into this issue. We've talked about, I think Steve also mentioned about, we don't have our narrative right as well. And from that sense, it's an opportunity to get it right as well. And to get it also bought in and integrated and really have that collaboration bit.
Was the fact that the reply to the survey question, the majority of people said moderate, which is a fairly sort of non-committal sense of not great optimism. Is there sufficient awareness in Oman to the economic opportunity that we're talking about here. The most valuable company in the world, well, maybe it's not yet, but Tesla is going, you know, it's in an outer space of value, that the low carbon economy does offer real massive, the opportunity to diversify an economy. You know, you have endless land for solar, you have endless coastline for wind, and you've got tourism opportunities of a massive scale. I'm just wondering, is there enough awareness in Oman to the opportunity of the low carbon economy if we're 60% of people are saying moderate?
Certainly not, really, certainly not. And I think there is a lot of work needs to happen on that front. Indeed, we have great opportunities, but it's really about the integrations. So how can we integrate all of these to make really a business case that is really plausible? So big opportunity on that front. Even in the simple things like energy conservations, I think we still have a long way to go on that front. So, but how do you really integrate all of this and educate indeed and improve awareness? So, because for this really to move forward, you need to have the society with you as well. So we shouldn't really neglect that part as well.
Well, the messaging there. Let's go to question number 2 in the survey of this panel. Stakeholders are talking the talk when it comes to managing water, food, energy nexus, but they have yet to fully walk the walk. And maybe that applies to every one of us. Where the stakeholders are talking the talk, but they're not walking the walks officially. Agree or disagree? Panelists still not allowed to vote. Irene, I want to vote. We have to leave it to everybody else to vote. Michael, if I might put you on the spot a little bit on this moment, as Kansas fellas are fairly robust. Cattle farming is deemed to be fairly incompatible to the Nexus transition. Massive consumers of water, there's issues of methane, etc. How do you circle that square, so to speak, square that circle as a major activist in this space and also a cattle farmer?
You know, cattle farmers may feel like oil and gas producers these days. Very, very misunderstood. Lots of opinions, lots of ideas of what we should be doing. You know, if I had a nickel for every time, you know, somebody came to me and suggested that the Nature Conservancy should just encourage people to not eat meat, you know, I'd be doing well. Unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. And I think it's more complicated about energy futures as well. The nuance matters. If we think about the macro picture of how food and energy arrives to people, well, let's just take the food equation right now. The driver on the food economy is protein. FAO says that we're going to see about a 75% increase in the demand for protein between now and 2050. So that's on an already, you know, incredibly large supply. So it gets into all kinds of protein sources. But animal production, whether it's ruminants or other animal systems, are important sources of nutrition for people. It's also part of cultural diets and so forth. Ruminant livestock really take advantage of one of the most important resources we have, and that's grasslands. Grasslands are solar collectors, they're biodiversity collectors, they have richness and uniqueness, and really the most sustainable economy to maintain grasslands is grazing management done by ruminants. Now there's ways to improve livestock, and we must do that. There's a lot of insight into how we can really start to accelerate the transition to cooling solutions through methane management. There's new insights on diets. There's new insights on grazing management, where we get into much more frequent rest and rotation. There's new insights on feeds and the sources of those feeds, and how when you produce those feeds in a way that sequesters the carbon in the soil, all of a sudden those feed supplies become low carbon or negative carbon. And so I think I personally hope at some point, Sean, that you and I will enjoy a negative emission steak. And so that is the future, is not to avoid the protein, avoid the opportunity to enjoy a cultural food, but for us to use better knowledge, better management, and innovation to really drive that to that future that we need, where it's a negative emission meal.
A negative that isn't what's it called? Real, or the company that went public this year to great fanfare, fake meat, basically. Let's go to the next survey, or to get the survey result of the last question, which I think is overwhelmingly agree, probably not a surprise there. Let's get this next question. The decision-making process for water, energy, and food sectors occurs in isolation and without the sufficient coordination and consideration of how changes in one sector can impact another. So Nexus, we're in isolation with limited understanding of impacting each other. Agree or disagree with that statement? Celine, the challenge of that alignment, the idea that we had in our last conversation, where everybody's in their own silo, so to speak, not to use a pun, but ultimately, what is the challenge there, do you think, in Oman, where these things are operating in isolation, and the need, and how do we bring them closer together? I suggested earlier, policy needs to be more aligned.
Yeah, I cannot agree more, really, in terms of the need for ensuring full integrations. I think the word integration is the key across all sectors, and I think the call for that is from all over. How can we integrate? Because by doing so, you get to understand each other better. You got to understand the challenges the energy sector is facing, the challenges the other sectors are facing, and really, how can you make the best out of those challenges? How can you convert those challenges into opportunities? How can you then drive those opportunities collectively together? So I see it as a great opportunities in really integrating more and collaborating more, is really sitting under one roof and talking about the issues together, and being very open and clear on those, because then solutions can be found and way forward can be found together. But really having silo mentalities and each sector really doing his own, that wouldn't get us far, honestly speaking.
Michael, are there examples that you are familiar with where that nexus is coming into a very successful coordination that we could learn from?
Yeah, I'd love to say that there's many, but I think that there are a few, and we just recently published a new report looking at what we're calling Foodscapes, and it's really to evaluate the food economy globally, but in a way that really starts to understand the unique variability that exists, the heterogeneity of the food system, so to speak. And what we find are archetypes that have very different management practices, infrastructure, political realities, market realities, and getting into those really matters. Understanding those really matter. I think there's some great examples where there's a completely different transition pathway that could really remake a food system in the context of a landscape or a watershed, based on circularity. Again, the opportunity to recover a lot of the waste streams involved in the food system that aren't today being successfully used. One of the things that I'm most inspired by is some of the interconnectedness with marine or freshwater ecosystems and terrestrial-based systems. A great example, back to your question on cattle, is we're now starting to experiment with different types of seaweed that have the ability, when they're brought into rations for cattle production, can completely inhibit enteric fermentation emissions. And So there's some nice connections that are starting to be exposed that way, basically through nature. I would say the other thing I would say is restorative aquaculture, I think, is one of the most exciting opportunities that I'm aware of, very much untapped. 3 billion people today depend on seafood as the primary protein in their diet. Yet most of that growth in seafood protein is going to come from aquaculture. It's going to double in production over the next 15 years. How that happens really matters. How that happens in a way that's restorative and regenerative, that's a great opportunity. It's one of the most high leverage, kind of high technical headroom areas for us to generate circularity. And I think it's got possibilities for Oman.
Well, I'll take that as Michael's recommendation, and while Salim thinks what he's top wish list is, let's get the last two survey questions in. The result of the last question, overwhelming agree, there's too much isolation. Let's get the next two questions and give people a few seconds to answer them. The fourth question, the biggest step to tackling water, food, energy nexus challenges in Oman must be the detailed roadmap with tangible action plans. Large committed financing, always need money. Deeper cross-sector collaboration, more pilot projects. This is clearly all of the above type question. There is no E. What we want to try and get is where the room thinks is the top priority to tackling this Nexus challenge, to bringing people together more than separate. So welcome your answer here, give you 10 seconds on this. A detailed roadmap, large committed financing needed, deeper cross-sector collaboration, more pilot projects. We usually would have a clock going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, but we don't. So I'll just orally say it, tick tock, tick tock. Got 10 seconds. The last question, because we do need to get to the round tables because those rooms are open. Improving, okay, that's the result, detailed roadmap, which hopefully this workshop this morning will deliver, and we will present it to the minister in a few weeks' time. The final question, improving and deepening young Omanis' awareness of the country's changing energy outlook and Nexus challenges is critical for future growth and sustainable development. It's hard to disagree with that, but I won't try and guide you. So getting the young on board to the real awareness in Oman of food security, water security, and scarcity seems to be a very, very important step. Salim, you get the final word today on this session and what your recommendation is that you think you'd be the top one to get this Nexus together and being productive for Oman.
I think if I were to say a key word will be really understanding each other challenges, and then how can really we solve the problem together. So and with that comes the integrations, collaborations, how we can make basically the full utilization of the strength of each other's. I mean, good example was given that, for instance, we produce quite a lot of water with the oil. So how can we get that through the food? I mean, the whole value chain, really in the most optimum way. So it's really about really sitting under one roof and really addressing challenges, our challenges, and maximizing integration. That's my.
Well, thank you for that, Salim. A result is probably the right place to end with the young people, given that more than 50% of the population of Oman is under the age of 25, and most of them are under the age of 12, and all of them will be carrying this challenge through their whole lifetime, and we need to provide them with as many solutions as the rest of what we can do in our generation. And this is one small part today. That wraps up the plenary session. We thank everybody for participating. Michael Dewan from Kansas and Salim El-Sakati from Muscat. We now have 4 round tables. The meeting rooms are open. So you log out of this meeting room and log into the meeting of your choice that are listed in the information that has been shared with everybody. So thank you for joining us in the plenary session. Thank you for all the speakers. And please make your way to one of the breakout, the 4 sessions that are just opening now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.